We haven't done a little ASMR moment in quite a while, so I'm drinking a watermelon poppy. No, this is not sponsored by Poppy, but everybody's drinking these things these days. I don't care if there's battery acid and gasoline in these beverages. I love them. Hey guys, welcome back to What They Don't Say. Today it's just me as in Shannon. It's just you and me and you and our friend Steve. Just kidding. It's just you and me today. Lauren is busy. And by busy, I mean her head is buried in books because finals are happening very, very soon. And she also broke her back. I'm just kidding. She didn't break her back, but she did hurt her back. So she is not with us today, but it's just you and me. And this episode is just going to be chill. We're in my room. I've got my cozies on. My hair hasn't been washed in 5 days, which honestly is a pretty standard thing for me, but it just looks particularly gross. But you don't care about that because you're here for whatever I'm talking about today. Today, we're going to be having a little discussion about some thoughts that I've had. There's some things that have been brought up in recent conversations, some articles that I've read, and just chats I've had with people, and some internal thoughts I've had. Some thoughts about my own sexual assault and being desensitized to it, the denial that I still experience with my assault, as well as feeling like it's not that bad. Let's get into it. Let's get into our solo episode. So recently I've been feeling a bit bland toward the topic of sexual assault. Now, I'm not talking like bland as in I don't care about it, but I'm just talking about the fact that when I talk about sexual assault, when I think about it, I don't feel anything. I don't feel anger. I don't feel sadness. I don't feel passion. And specifically in relation to my own sexual assault. I know, that's crazy considering, we record a lot and we as in Lauren and I are passionately talking about all these topics within sexual assault with aggression or, passion and all of that. But recently the way I feel on the inside has been just kind of gray, just kind of blah when I think about sexual assault. And that can only lead me to one conclusion. And that conclusion is that, I just must be so desensitized to sexual assault that I feel nothing about it. But that's not fully true because a few weeks ago we had somebody write in and their story was like nothing I've ever read before in my entire life. And that's not to say that like one person's story is better than the next, but it was a story that I had never heard of this sort of sexual assault happening, and it was so aggressive, and the way it was written was, almost poetic in a very sad, fucked up way. But I felt something, and I almost had to stop reading the story because it was so gruesome and graphic. But that was like a brief moment of like, okay, I'm not fully desensitized yet, but it did take a story with brutal details in order for me to get to that point. So I guess this whole little spiel here is just that I've been feeling a little desensitized. And within that, it's kind of taken me to this new place that I continually fight. And I've fought against this thought mentally since I was assaulted. And that thing is I really struggle immensely with denial and my assault. Excuse me. And what I mean by that is almost every time I think about my assault, I have to think about not every single time, but many times when I think about my assault, I think I have these little quotes that run through my head or little sayings or that little voice in my head that goes, well, are you sure that happened? It wasn't really that bad. Or are you sure that happened? Like maybe there was a part of you that asked for it. Like maybe you did kiss him back. Maybe you weren't just laying there. Maybe you insinuated that you wanted to have sex and that it wasn't rape. And all of those thoughts are denial. That is just pieces of denial sneaking in. And I have them all the time. So in the past, when I have feelings of denial, there's two things that I tell myself. And if you're somebody who has frequent thoughts of denial when thinking about your assault or your rape or whatever it is, these are things that have helped me. So I hope that they can help you. And the first one is that I said no. And not everybody physically says no. So this is just kind of me speaking to people who have said no. And it doesn't make it consensual if you didn't actually say no. But I said no. I said no many, many times, like probably 7 or 8 times. Who knows, maybe more. But the point is like that was a moment before the assault that I can look at and say, I didn't ask for that. That wasn't a consensual thing because I didn't ask for it, right? And I actually just fucking denied it. Like I actually said no. This is no. Like that is a denial of the act of sexual intercourse, right? So that's one moment that I go back to. And the other moment that I go back to when I'm feeling a lot of denial is what happened to me after. And after I was raped, I remember sitting on the toilet, and honestly, at this point in the game, I think that I remember the way that I felt after being raped far more than I remember the actual rape itself. And the way that I felt when I was sitting on the toilet was so horrible. And I truly felt like someone had just scooped my insides out and thrown them on the floor and like stepped on them. And I felt so empty and gross and just confused. And aside from that, I was wailing, not crying, not whimpering, wailing. And I'm not a huge crier in general, so for that to happen so immediately was a very big response. And so when I'm feeling this denial, I go back to that moment of, if that had been consensual, I never, ever would have felt that way. I wouldn't have felt that horrible afterwards had it been consensual. I understand that I'm fortunate to have those two moments to think about and to reflect upon. And I know that not everybody gets those moments and not everybody has that reaction. Not everybody understands what happened to them after. The point is I think it's important to try to pinpoint those moments for yourself, and you almost have to like prove to yourself why it was assault, which is really fucked up, but it's because you're fighting against that narrative inside of your head that's saying it wasn't assault or it wasn't rape. And you need to kind of find those key points that are like facts of like, look, brain, you're wrong. Like, this did happen to me. That was not consensual. I didn't ask for it. So that's just been something that has kind of helped me in the past. The other piece to all of this is, since Lauren and I have started this podcast, we've read stories from survivors that you guys have sent in. We've received many stories from all of you. And that is such an incredible and rewarding experience to, be close to somebody's vulnerability. But something that I've realized is the more stories that I hear, the more I start to think, is my story not bad enough? Like, maybe it's not that bad. And I know you guys are going to come for me and be like, Shannon, it's okay. Like, it was that bad. Don't compare your trauma, especially considering Lauren and I are always like, don't compare your trauma. Assault is always assault, which I firmly stand by for everybody else. I sit there and I'm like, hey, all of you lovely people that are listening to this, don't ever compare your trauma to other people, because we can't compare what happens from one person to the next, because there will always be somebody who has it worse, etc., etc. Assault is still assault, no matter what, quote unquote degree it was. It's still fucking bad. It's still awful. It still shouldn't have happened in the first place. And you have every right to feel however you need to feel. But for some reason, it feels so much more okay to tell everybody else that instead of myself. And what I think this is a case of, it's a lot easier said than done, or preach as I say, not as I do. Maybe, I don't really have advice here in this exact moment, but it's just that I also struggle with feeling like it's not that bad. And I was talking to someone today who we're going to have on the podcast in the future, and she had written out her story in the form of an article. And I was talking about or we were having a conversation with how hard and challenging it is to sit down and put your entire story onto paper, or sit down and, record your entire story through video or audio, because your story can never, ever be fully confined to that piece of paper or that Word document or that SD card, because it's so much more than just that. And I think this fear of it's not that bad stems from the fact that, Lauren and I have our stories out there. We have full episodes for each of them, and there are our second and third most listened to episodes on here. And that's great. Thank you for listening to our stories and being respectful of them. But I worry sometimes that it's going to be scrutinized, and that people are going to listen and think, well, that's not that bad. Like, she wasn't hit. She wasn't like abused for years. She wasn't molested. Like, she wasn't a child when that happened, or it just wasn't bad enough. I'm afraid of that judgment. And just to be clear, nobody has given me any. Like, maybe they've said it to their friends, but nobody has directly written in and given Lauren and I any shit for our stories. So that's just for clarity. This is fully me projecting onto myself all of these fears, just to clarify. There's this idea of like, I have almost confined my story to that one episode, but it is so much more. And I will never, ever be able to get all of the details out onto paper or onto an episode or into an episode, because that experience happened, and memory is memory, and memory shifts things, and details go missing, or feelings change. Like, I remember how I felt after, like I said, but I may have flashbacks and feel like I'm getting raped, but that moment that I was actually assaulted, like that actual one, I will never feel that exact thing. I can feel very, very close to it, but I will never feel that moment again, which is good. Very good. Like I said, flashbacks will happen. I will feel very similar to that moment. But the point of this conversation is just that your story can't be confined. And I think that I worry that I will get judgment because my story isn't perfect, but it's still my story and it's my truth. And if you're somebody who's been wanting to like write your quote unquote getting it right, you will never get it right, because your story cannot be confined to a medium or to a channel, because it's a life experience. It's a traumatic event. And there is no way, not even the best writer or videographer in the world could capture what these experiences are like. And so maybe that just has to be okay. And that has to be okay enough for me, is just to know that and trust that people who are listening to my story are going to respect it and give it the space that it needs, and know that it can't be confined to a singular episode. With this idea of it's not that bad and denial, and I do believe that those really feed into each other. We've talked a fair amount on the podcast about, sort of different ideas within rape culture that feed into one another. And I think that victim blaming and saying like, well, you shouldn't have, worn that, or, are you sure that you weren't leading him on, or are you sure that you weren't, making it seem like you were interested in them? That victim blaming leads victims to question their story, and that makes us in denial, right? So the victim blaming literally leads into denial, and then it makes us think, well, maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe it was okay. And then you start to hear other people's stories and you think, whoa, like my story sucked, but it wasn't as bad as that girl's. And it makes us feel better about our own story, almost, to diminish that idea of it's not that bad. Or maybe it doesn't make us feel better about our own story. It feels like we can't justify the pain that someone else has caused us, that violation to our body. But with all of that, there's this book that I listened to while in the midst of the court case and after I was assaulted, and it's called Not That Bad by Roxane Gay. Somebody recently told me that Roxane Gay is kind of canceled. To be honest, I didn't look into it because this book that she wrote is incredible, and it really put onto paper a lot of the ways that I was feeling during the court process. And essentially, it's a collection of people's stories and people from all walks of life and all kinds of stories. The premise of the book is that it is that bad, and your story deserves space, and you deserve to be able to feel like it was that bad and that it did fuck your life up. Maybe it didn't fuck your life up, but the point is just that your feelings are justified around it. And I'm going to read the book introduction, about 3 book pages long, so bear with me while I read it. But I hope that you'll stick with me because I think it is quite powerful. I hope that it replicates how you felt the same way that replicated how I felt, and it brings you some peace. When I was 12 years old, I was gang raped in the woods behind my neighborhood by a group of boys with the dangerous intentions of bad men. It was a terrible, life-changing experience. Before that, I had been naive, sheltered. I believed people were inherently good and that the meek should inherit. I was faithful and believed in God. And then I didn't. I was broken. I was changed. I will never know who I would have been had I not become the girl in the woods. As I got older, I met countless women who had endured all manner of violence, harassment, sexual assault, and rape. I heard their painful stories and started to think, what I went through was bad, but it wasn't that bad. Most of my scars have faded. I have learned to live with my trauma. Those boys killed the girl I was, but they didn't kill all of me. They didn't hold a gun to my head or a blade to my throat and threaten my life. I survived. I taught myself to be grateful I survived, even if survival didn't look like much. It was comforting, perhaps, to tell myself that what I went through wasn't that bad. Allowing myself to believe that being gang raped wasn't that bad allowed me to break down my trauma into something more manageable, into something I could carry with me instead of allowing the magnitude of it to destroy me. But in the long run, diminishing my experience hurt me far more than it helped. I created an unrealistic measure for what was acceptable and how I was treated in relationships, in friendships, in random encounters with strangers. This is to say that if I even had a bar for how I deserved to be treated, that bar was so low it was buried far below ground. If being gang raped wasn't that bad, then it wasn't at all bad being shoved or having my arm grabbed so hard it left 5 bruises in the form of fingerprints, or being catcalled for having large breasts, or having a hand shoved down my pants, or being told I should be grateful for romantic attention because I wasn't good enough, and on and on. Everything was terrible, but none of it was that bad. The list of ways I allowed myself to be treated badly grew into something I could no longer carry, not at all. Buying into the notion of not that bad made me incredibly hard on myself for not quote-unquote getting over it fast enough as the years passed and I was still carrying so much hurt, so many memories. Buying into this notion made me numb to bad experiences that weren't as bad as the worst stories I heard. For years, I fostered wildly unrealistic expectations of the kinds of experiences worthy of suffering until very little was worthy of suffering. The surfaces of the empathy became calloused. I don't know when this changed. When I began realizing that all the encounters people have with sexual violence are indeed that bad. I didn't have a grand epiphany. I finally reconciled my own past enough to realize that what I had endured was that bad. That what anyone has suffered is that bad. I finally met enough people, mostly women, who also believed that the terrible things they endured weren't that bad, when clearly those experiences were indeed that bad. I saw what calloused empathy looked like in people who had every right to wear their wounds openly and hated the sight of it. When I first came up with the idea for this anthology, I wanted to assemble a collection of essays about rape culture, some reportage, some personal essays, writing that engage with the idea of rape culture, what it means to live in a world where the phrase rape culture exists. I was interested in the discourse around rape culture because the phrase is used often, but rarely do people engage with what it actually means. What it is like to live in a culture where it often seems like it is a question of when, not if, a woman will encounter some kind of sexual violence. What is it like for men to navigate this culture, whether they are indifferent to rape culture or working to end it or contributing to it in ways significant or small? This anthology became something far different from what I originally intended. As I started receiving submissions, I was stunned by how much testimony writers offered. There were hundreds and hundreds of stories from people all along the gender spectrum, giving voice to how they have suffered, in one way or another, from sexual violence, or how they have been affected by intimate relationships with people who have experienced sexual violence. I realized that my original intentions for this anthology had to give way to what the book so clearly needed to be. A place for people to give voice to their experiences. A place for people to share how bad this all is. A place for people to identify the ways they have been marked by rape culture. As of writing this, something in this deeply fractured culture is, I hope, changing. More people are beginning to realize just how bad things really are. Harvey Weinstein has fallen from grace, named by a number of women as a perpetrator of sexual violence. His crimes have been laid bare. His victims are, at least to some extent, vindicated. Women and men are coming forward and naming sexual harassers or worse, in publishing journalism, the tech world. Women and men are saying this is how bad it actually is. For once, perpetrators of sexual violence are facing consequences. Powerful men are losing their jobs and their access to circumstances where they can exploit the vulnerable. This is a moment that will hopefully become a movement. These essays will, hopefully, contribute to the movement in a meaningful way. The voices shared here are voices that matter and demand to be heard. So that is the introduction to the book, Not That Bad. The book is technically called Not That Bad, Dispatches from Rape Culture. I hope that if you are somebody who's been feeling like your assault or experience with sexual violence, if you're feeling like it's quote unquote not that bad, I hope this is a reminder that your feelings are justified. If you're having a hard time getting out of bed and you were raped 8 years ago, it's okay. It's okay to still cry about your assault. And I guess for me, it's okay to be a little numb about my assault. And, I feel numb about my assault because I'm wondering if I've just been not thinking about it, or if I'm actually fully healed, or if I'm desensitized. I don't really know. But maybe I will give myself some space this week to sit with my assault and not necessarily try to recall details, but just give it some space. Give my trauma some space to hurt. And for some of you, you might be like, bitch, if I wasn't thinking about it, I would just leave that. Don't poke the bear. Don't poke the bear. But I think that the moments where I heal are when I think about it, when I work through it, whether that's through therapy or with a friend or through writing or through talking to you guys. And Jess Michaels from our Epstein episode, or our last episode, said it so well that everybody said it was brave that she came forward, but the moments that were really hard for her were where she was sitting and facing herself and facing what she had gone through. Those are the moments that take the true bravery, because those were the painful parts, where you're being honest with yourself about what the fuck has happened to you. So I'm going to try to be honest with myself this week about what's happened to me. And just as a reminder, it is that bad. And that's not saying that you can't be okay, because you can heal from this. It's just to say that your feelings are justified. I love you so much. Thank you so much for listening and for sitting with me. And honestly, I really wish you guys could talk back to me. Like, I wish we could just do an interactive podcast episode where you could ask questions and share your stories and give your thoughts on things. Unfortunately, that's not how this works, but what you can do is, if you have thoughts or questions or comments or want to share your story, or really just you want to tell us fucking anything, send us an email at whattheydon'tsaythepodcast@gmail.com. You can also DM us on Instagram or TikTok. All that stuff will be linked down below. I feel so grateful to have all of you, and you guys are amazing. I love you guys so much. I hope you have a great rest of your week. I'll see you in the next episode. Catch you on the flip side. Cheers.